I'm going to tell y'all right now, all of these wonderful people would not be here without Patreon supporters like you. If you enjoy credible news, reviews, and commentary on UFOs and UAPs 5 days a week, you want to support this show. What's your name? Marty. Marty, look how easy this is, Marty. Pick up your phone. Boom! You're a Patreon member. I mean, look, it's so easy. You just click the link, which is right here. Just for $1 a month, you can support this show. Just fill out the information and pledge what's comfortable for you. It could be $1, $5, $10, or who knows. Just support.
Hello, everybody. Greetings. I'm not muted, am I? I'm not pulling a Dan Zetterstrom. No. Fantastic, guys. Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Known Quantities. I'm your host, Daniel Miller. So happy to have you here. We are your go-to for a current understanding of science, technology, and futurism. I'm very excited about today's guest, but before we get to that, just a few orders of business. Got to pay the bills. Don't forget that this is a podcast, which means we are on Apple Music / iTunes, depending on how old you are, you get that reference, and Spotify. Make sure to rate, review, follow. It supports the show. Speaking of supporting the show, we are a public access and all access channel. So we are supported by viewers like you, which means I am supported by my Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Daniel Miller, just my name. Super chats are open. That is another great way to support the channel. If you have any burning questions for Dr. Cogswell or our panelists tonight, that is a great way to get them asked. Make sure to like and subscribe. Ring that bell. Our times do change day to day, so that way you're never going to be caught flat-footed and find out you missed an episode. And finally, thank you, Das Tapes, for your awesome music and for leading me in here. You can find information to get more of their music over on our link below, Bandcamp link below. And without further ado, everybody, I'm going to bring in a guest I have been wanting to speak with for quite some time. Dr. Chris Cogswell, is the host and creator of the Mad Scientist podcast, a weekly show on the history and philosophy of pseudoscience. He received his Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of New Hampshire in both chemical engineering and philosophy, and a Ph.D. in chemical engineering from Northeastern University. He attempts to understand believer communities through empathy and skepticism and showcase the hard science behind claims that many others would dismiss as science fiction. Mr. Cogswell, how are you doing today, sir?
Good, man. How you doing? Glad to be on the show again. Or on your show for the first time, on UCR for the second time.
On UCR again, yes.
Yeah,
thanks for having me. Thanks for coming on, man. I'm really excited to speak with you.
Yeah, of course.
And I see you're in space. Is it cold out there?
Floating around in space. Yeah, it's very cold.
Right.
You know, the wife freezing. You know, it's funny actually. You ever see the Magic School Bus when you were a kid?
Oh my God, absolutely.
That episode when Arthur takes off the helmet in Mars and he freezes to death. And
yes, it terrified me.
So evidently that wouldn't happen in space because there's no convection, right? Which is the dominant cooling mechanism. So it'd be conduction only because there's no moving gases. So don't take your helmet off in space though, anyways. But
doctor would not recommend. So
interesting.
What does happen then? You know, just in case I have an itch to take it
off.
So
you will freeze to death eventually, right? But more than likely, it's the vacuum that'll kill you. So good times.
Good times.
Just gonna set this up for the whole rest of the conversation. We're just gonna be talking about blood and guts and freezing.
Yes.
It's gonna be great. Give me a lot of fun.
I like it. Get ready, kids. Awesome, man. God, Magic School Bus. I love that show. Dude, so much.
So good.
Yeah, so good. I would just watch these episodes over and over again. Mrs. Frazzle, was it? Mrs. Frizzle?
Miss Frizzle, I think. It was Miss Frizzle.
Man, what a great, it was public access television back then was great. You know, I got that. You had Wishbone. You had Bill Nye. Kratts Creatures. Is that what it was? Oh, man.
I think so, yeah. Wild Kratts. Yeah, man.
Yeah. Deep Cut.
That's a good show.
Awesome, man. Well, I guess I'd like to ask every guest is what brought you to the making your podcast and talking about the philosophy of science and pseudoscience and addressing people who may be into that in a more compassionate, empathetic way.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I grew up in a household that was sort of a weird mix between science and pseudoscience all the time.
So my family is originally, my mom's family is originally from Italy, and from a pretty small town in Italy. And so when I grew up, my mom's family always had a lot of, my mom did like tarot cards with her friends and did my astrology chart when I was a baby to see what kind of person I would turn into. And, in my household, like on the shelves when we were kids, or when I was a kid, on our shelves, my mom would have books on like, cults and psychology and Scientology and aliens and all this other kind of stuff. Right. So I always kind of had that influence as a kid growing up, but my family was also really, really into the sciences, so my my grandmother and my mom and my dad and my uncles and aunts and everyone always really pushed us to learn about science and to be involved and to sort of look at the world in a way where you learn all the time. Yeah. But also not to just take your point of view as being the right one, because you could be wrong. And so when I got to school, one of the weirdest things, I guess, when I got to school was my research work when I was in undergraduate, and the stuff that I was interested in really was in sort of understanding why it is sometimes the technologies or scientific stuff gets accepted by the public really easily, and in other cases it doesn't. So a good example of that actually is light bulbs. So if you remember back maybe like 10, 15 years ago, there was a huge thing out in the media that the government was going to come for your light bulbs.
Right. I remember that.
You remember that?
Yeah.
That the government was coming to change your old light bulbs with high efficiency ones that didn't work as good. And for some reason that was going to happen.
Right.
And of course it was nonsense and it was a wacky thing to believe, but people believed it. And but the ultimate question of like, should you change your light bulb for a more efficient one? Yeah. Why?
Right.
Save money. Right? Like, there's no downside. The government's going to give them to you. Just do it. Right? Just do the thing and you'll save money and it's better for the environment. And so who cares? But some people had really hard views on that, including my grandma. My grandma really my grandma lived through like Mussolini. Wow. And she was straight up like, Obama's coming for my light bulbs, right? Like my grandma was straight up like they're coming for them. So it was a little bit interesting. So, but my grandma on the other hand was very, very smart. So, I wanted to understand, how is it that somebody who taught me a lot of things and helped me so much in my life, how is it that she could understand these things that I came to know and thought were completely ridiculous?
Right.
And so trying to understand that was something very interesting to me. But the opposite to that is also really interesting. The opposite view, which is, what about cases where non-scientific stuff gets viewed as science by the public? So not just when a scientific fact isn't pushed forward, but what about cases where there's nothing really to it? Or what about those cases where a non-scientific field, like say alchemy, turns into a science, right? So alchemy becoming chemistry is a really interesting historical case. So those were the reasons why I wanted to get involved and kind of understand these things. And so, when I was a kid, I loved aliens. I loved Bigfoot. I loved all that kind of stuff. When I was a kid, I even thought that, maybe I had seen an alien and stuff like that and everything else. And as I got older, I sort of came to realize or came to think that, this was probably just a dream or a physiological event happening from family sort of history and everything else. So, it's that understanding though, and that kind of grounding in this, where I understand how a logical, smart person could feel like they had an experience or even if you don't believe the experience is real, someone had something scary happen to them.
Right.
That you can't deny. Right. So the kind of the adage I like to go back to is, I may not believe in aliens, and I don't know if I believe in aliens or not, but I certainly believe in the experiencers, people who say they've had something scary happen to them. We may disagree on the outcome or the reality of it, but you deserve to be heard, and your story should be looked into. So, I guess sort of from the skeptical point of view, I'm not skeptical enough for the skeptics to like me, and I'm not believer enough for the UFO believers to like me. So it's just a perfect nice edge of hatred. It's pretty solid.
Right. But I think that's a good sign that you are, it's, I fall into that camp sometimes too, at least on Twitter, where sometimes some skeptics will call it what I say, but then the other half there's some believers who are saying you're not, why don't you just go with it? So I think I think that you're spot on. I mean, at the end of the day, if we're going to talk about this, in instance, for instance, just where you're talking about the experiencers, at the end of the day, someone had an experience that I know some people have positive experiences, but some of them very much not so. And I think when some people only focus on that doesn't seem possible and write it off, what you are doing is you're kind of just pushing aside the human being in it who,
yes,
no matter what the answer might be, if you are going to talk to someone and invalidate that experience completely, I just don't see how any way there's going to be a conversation, because that person, I mean, it's just imagine, that person, no matter what the answer might be, feels like they were abducted or kidnapped. And if you say instead, some man broke into my home and kidnapped me when I was 7, I think people are like, oh my God, that's wow. What, and so I think it's important to maintain compassion, because no matter what the claim, that person underwent some kind of negative experience. And so I really it made me very happy to see the fact that we can still be skeptical, but keep the human being in mind in the same time. And if anything, I think that's kind of want to get into. I think that is the answer. I think that is the answer if we want to have a dialogue with people and actually reach people, rather than just, laugh off. And I'm not just talking about specifically UFOs anymore. I'm talking about just any kind of conspiracy theory or pseudoscience or cult or anything like that. If we just laugh it off and say, oh, that's so ridiculous, that is the end of the conversation, because why would someone want to talk to someone who makes them feel bad?
It's interesting. So for a while in the world, so what you're talking about really is now under the umbrella of science communication.
Right.
And it's something that I think really the sciences have failed pretty spectacularly at doing for the last 50 years, 60 years, maybe. I mean, if you, like you said, if you talk to people, a lot more people in the public have met somebody who claims to have seen, say, like a UFO, then they probably know a scientist.
Absolutely.
I mean, I can count. I work in the sciences, and I can count on one hand how many scientists, people with a PhD, let's say, that I met before I got to college. So those people, the kind of communities that they work in, are very, we talk about the ivory tower, and it's sort of a cliche and everything else at this point, but it's very true. There is, there's science and things going on that if we explain to the public or talk to the public about, well, what is it that we can actually do, in a way that is, again, sort of not intellectually, you don't have to be a jerk, number one, right? You don't have to be a jerk to people.
Yeah. And
you also don't need to, most people are smart. Most people are able to kind of understand what you're talking about. And I think for a lot of the scientific community and people, what they try to do is the sign of like a really bad science communicator is they talk down to people and they use a lot of jargon.
Yes.
So it's a very, you end up with this situation where you feel like you are being talked down to. And not only you're being talked down to, but the person talking to you they just sound like they're speaking another language.
Right.
So why would you engage with them? So totally. It's an interesting thing. On the other hand, though, one thing I sort of grapple with a lot of the time is with the sort of, because we used to talk about how there was this sort of challenge where, if you let a kind of community believe in pseudoscience and conspiracy theory and everything else, you will have bad outcomes. right? That you'll have things like, say, like, all these other things. But then that was always kind of looked at as like, well, that's ridiculous. That'll never happen. Like Waco didn't happen, or Jonestown didn't happen, or, these other kind of, again, cult belief is just sort of conspiracy theory and pseudoscience run amok.
Mm-hmm.
And we just sort of say, that doesn't happen anymore. That was the thing in the 60s and the 70s. But it's happening today still.
Absolutely.
And so there's a fine line between there's a really fine line between disinformation, or sort of targeted and information used as a weapon, versus just being interested and being open to experiences and ideas.
Right.
There is a difference there, and finding where that line is really hard, because again, we live in a world, and we want to live in a culture and a society where no one's thoughts are policed or questioned or anything else like that, right? You want to be able to say things that are against the grain, of course. But it's sort of in those cases where we see, there's sort of, just like if you were studying a normal, like say a biological system, you would find patterns that emerge.
Mm-hmm.
We see similar patterns emerge in sort of targeted disinformation or targeted misinformation that's used, so like the misinformation around, say, fracking is a really good example of this. So fracking was pushed really hard by the oil and gas industry as this way to overcome the issues of transitioning away from oil, and the reason it was pushed so hard in the United States is because we have a lot of natural gas. Right. Fracking is really good economically for us. And so the kind of point of fracking, or sort of the culture war issues around fracking, were pushed really, really hard. Whereas the people living in the communities where fracking was happening, regardless of the politics that they had water that they couldn't drink, and had animals that were being poisoned, and, ridiculous craziness, right? So those sorts of challenges are, that information kind of set, or the way that it moves and things, those are important, I think, for us to understand as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because without that, I feel like a lot of this comes down to, I guess, asking the right questions, and also just as a population in general, scientific literacy, right? If something becomes a culture war instead of, it's just, I remember that. Like, it's a shame that it became a culture war, and the dialogue wasn't instead about how it affected these people, or what maybe not just the economic consequences would be, but the environmental ones, or the
Yes.
and of course that's a whole thing, and lobbyists exist to just improve bottom line for certain industries, like all lobbyists do for all industries. So that's where kind of politics and science, I think, really do not get along together very well. But that is kind of, I think, an issue that we'll keep running into, and probably will continue to. I think as scientific literacy continues to, I believe, not just not improve, but get worse throughout this country as opposed to our other countries. Are you concerned about the trends and where we're heading, and becoming this, I guess, a wider chasm between, like you said, the ivory tower, or scientists really trying to communicate, but then also a population that I think overall hasn't been served, and I guess I'm making a lot of assumptions based on what my own opinion is, by their education system, to really kind of setting them up for a very good success, I guess I should say.
Yeah, so I definitely want to answer that, but I also do want to answer a question though that Laura Campbell asked in the chat, which I think was a really good one. So let me answer your question first, and then we'll answer that one, which was about experiencers, and it basically said important to talk to experiencers, but don't trust them as being legitimate. So how can you do those two things? Right, I think that's a really important point. Yeah, exactly. There we go. Mm-hmm. So definitely want to answer that for sure. In terms of, I guess, sort of how do you merge that gap between, so what we try to do in the podcast, and what I've tried to do by being like, I've been fairly involved in UFO stuff, and I've been involved from the level of like actually looking for stuff and trying to do experiments on it. And also as a critic, and as a skeptic, and as somebody who tries to put forward, I guess, the kind of morals, or the I have a very, I guess, kind of stringent code of conduct that I try to keep myself to, and I have some red lines I won't cross, right? Personally. And so I try to at least explain that and make my kind of viewpoint heard there in this field. But what I'll say is that a lot of people who are interested in this subject are people who are interested in the sciences, who are interested in the natural world, who are interested in futurism and where technology can go. And for a lot of them, that world, the information that's available out there, the world of science, people, everything else, they are completely cut off from that. And it's because of, like you said, issues of, say, the ivory tower, and also economic issues, right? I mean, if you are working a minimum wage job 40 hours a week, you don't have time to go on Wikipedia and learn about quantum physics.
Of course.
You know what I mean? So there are all kinds of things keeping a lot of the public from engaging with scientific information. And that's a real huge challenge, I think, ethically for us as a society. I don't know what the answer is. What we try to do on the podcast is we try to talk about these stories and these, from the gamut, right? So ghost stories, UFOs, Bigfoot, giant space lasers, the history of surgery, whatever. We try to talk about all this kind of science stuff, but we try to do it in a way that is entertaining and also talks about more of the philosophy or the trends. Science is taught in a really bad way, where I think science is taught in a bad way. I think math is taught in a bad way in this country too, where we basically ask people to memorize stuff or, you have to use this equation or everything else. Yeah. Science is just looking for patterns in nature. That's all science is, really. It's looking for patterns and then testing those patterns. And anyone can do that. And a lot of fields of science started from people at home. Ecology, the world of environmental engineering started because mothers and kids at home in the Victorian era would go around bird watching in their backyard. That's how ecology started. And now it's a huge field, right? It's a huge thing. Zoology basically began because rich people had the time to go out there and look at animals, So I think that in general, what we need to do is we need to make science accessible to people, but we also need to not be afraid to engage with people where they actually live. Yes. I think the Mythbusters did a really good job of pushing science to the public. You know what I mean? Absolutely. And so as opposed to, say, people watching, say, Ancient Aliens or whatever. Yeah. And you see a lot of archaeologists complain, Ancient Aliens is so bad for archaeology and everything else. And I agree, Ancient Aliens, probably not the greatest show of all time. Right? I've railed against Ancient Aliens plenty myself on the show and everywhere else. But you have to make something that's interesting for people. You have to make something that they're going to want to consume and want to get involved with and want to understand. And so if you can't do that, it's not, you can't blame customers for not coming to your store.
Right. Exactly.
You think people should be eating sushi, but they're all eating cheeseburgers. Well, just make your sushi better.
Exactly. People don't want to do homework on their time off.
Exactly. And, so I think there's a lot of different ways that we can do better here for sure. And, I hope that the podcast is one small way of doing that and just being accessible. I'll never forget. I went to the first UFO conference I ever went to was actually with Ryan Sprague and a couple other folks.
He was in here earlier. I know he's still around, but hi, Ryan.
Yeah, I did see him. Hi, Ryan. Good to see you, man. And I was wearing, I wore a pair of shorts that was all white. It was white with flowers all over it. Because I was in LA. It was a conference. It's I'm not going to dress up as I'm going to dress up like I normally dress, right?
For sure.
Just, whatever. And someone came out of the session. We went into a session where it was all about experiencers. And we came out and someone came up to me and said, I've never seen a scientist just dress like a normal person. Wow. That's crazy.
That's so sad to hear.
That's so sad. Most people have no interaction with the sciences at all. So I just think we need to be more available. Really, you know, it's really easy to demonize something you don't know. And so if your only image of scientists are the people responsible for like every horror movie or early science fiction horror movie, I should say, you know, that's not going to be great. So yeah, something else.
Right. Like, where's your lab coat?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
There was a guy. Yeah. Anyways, someone there had a lab coat and it was very, come on, man. Come on.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I take for granted my exposure too, because I have family in academia, and I've been very lucky to have some incredible science teachers growing up. Because even though I am like a creative, and I definitely have, my life has leaned more towards the arts, I've always had a very intense interest and fondness for science and love of space science specifically. I was probably may have been an astronomer if I wasn't so terrible at math, is what I told myself as a kid. And I credit that to the things that I think you kind of take for granted growing up, which are, you know, access to a good education. And, you know, I'm lucky that I happen to live, like, the public schools had a good magnet system. I got to take AP classes, you know, and the teachers happen to be engaged, even though they're terribly underpaid. And I got to go to a great college and further just take classes I thought really cool. But, you know, that's not something that's available to so many people. And then we turn around and are like, why don't people believe science? So I guess my question then would be, where do we, that's a tough question. I mean, like, yes, you must solve all of humanity's problems here, Cogswell, but where do we go from here? Like I just see, you know, we're looking at, it's funny that I was really going to ask this, and my head's like trying to avoid politics, but it's kind of sad that it even becomes political. But it's about, like, what about, you know, this COVID? Look at COVID right now. I look at, you know, Havana syndrome, these things that are kind of happening that aren't really, they're very different, but, you know, in one instance I think actually they're perfect examples of kind of two different problems, where one is, I think there is a lack of understanding from the scientific point of view, but also a justified hesitancy based on history. And then the other side, you have what I think is the government trying to address an issue that I think science maybe should be taking more of a look at. So we can, like, address those two in separate questions. I mean, for COVID, I mean, are you worried about people long-term just kind of getting too resistant to the idea of vaccinations, or just listening to what our health officials are telling us?
So I think part of the problem is science is always political. Science was political when Galileo was doing it, you know, when Kepler was doing it, when Socrates, you know, Socrates was sentenced to death by the government of Athens. You know? So it's not exactly like philosophy and science or these sort of pursuits of knowledge have ever been free of politics and free of the world of politics. So the first thing I'll say is definitely that, you know, we want to think of science as being non-political, and it's always been political. It'll always be political. There's no separating it from politics, because science is funded by the government.
Yeah, look at the National Science Foundation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a huge thing. That's a huge part we just have to kind of accept, that science is political.
Right.
At the same time, one of the things I think is really interesting is science is sort of driven by politics, but more than that, science is driven by economics. Science is driven by money, you know, and that is again always been sort of true. Right? We don't fund, even when we fund scientists today, that funding comes in small chunks, and it has to be approved by the government and everything else, and it has to show some kind of viability of being useful and everything else.
Right.
But, you know, if we think about, so I think like what Arlene is saying here, right? So when science becomes politicized, science becomes unreliable. You cannot rely on science when government is controlling the flow of data. I think that for the most part, we want to believe that science the good thing about science is that the data, it doesn't matter where the data comes from. It shouldn't matter where the data comes from, because the data can be verified by other people.
Exactly.
There's a concept in science known as reproducibility. And so essentially what that is if you publish a scientific paper in a journal, then I should be able to follow your paper and reproduce your experiment and get the same results.
I absolutely love that.
It's jumping in. Jumping in. So
thank you, Lou.
That
he's right. I love that. I'm going to
bunch.
clip that. I think it's important to remember that.
The problem, and actually this is sort of a funny thing, because companies find out, or companies have discovered, that actually if they just purchase lots of scientific papers, about 50% of them at minimum, 50% at minimum will not be reproducible. So they just waste all their money, right? They waste loads of their R&D budget. So that issue about that issue of kind of reproducibility, that is definitely true. And so what you need to do, what the public needs to do, and I think what a lot of people need, is they need to understand the way that science is verified, the reproducibility question. Yeah. So actually someone in the chat again said something really interesting, right? A white paper is not a scientific paper. A white paper is a blog post for nerds.
Right.
That is what a white paper is, right? White papers are not peer reviewed. They're not published anywhere. I can write a billion white papers on my weekends, call them science, put them on my ResearchGate profile, put them out there. So white papers are not worth the paper they're printed on. They mean nothing. A scientific paper is submitted to a scientific journal. That journal will have an actual number that tells you how important or how highly ranked that journal article is. That is a really good way of telling if a paper is worth anything or not. Yeah, so if it's published in a good journal, right, then it's good. That's an important paper potentially.
Right.
You can also tell how many times a paper has been cited. Right. So a citation literally means when I publish a scientific paper, someone else reads it, thinks this is important to my research work. They'll basically put it as a reference for their work. And that's actually a trap. It's a very easy trap that it's a very easy trap for people to fall into, especially in the world of pseudoscience, because it's really easy to fake scientific credentials. Really easy. It's super duper easy. You can say, hey, I graduated from the University of X, and I took a week-long course in, the effects of, infrared radiation on the human body. And so now on my resume, I put infrared radiation specialist on the human body. I can write white papers in my blog and call them scientific papers. I could put my podcast episodes as scientific publications. Right. I could list those. They're not real. They don't mean anything. Totally. I research a lot for them, but they're not scientific works, really. They're not peer reviewed. And so it is extremely important to keep in mind. It's important to keep in mind all those factors. And that's why, and it comes across as being sort of, a jerk. But, when, say, like a UFO scientist comes out, or an expert in Bigfoot or something or whatever comes out, and people say, like, hey, that person isn't they're not part of the scientific world. Like, they've never published a paper that's been cited or even looked at. They've never been to a conference, right? That actually means something. It does mean something. Yeah. A good example of this is Melba Ketchum. She's this, she's a woman who's published a bunch of papers supposedly on Bigfoot DNA. She claims to have gotten Bigfoot DNA. And the journal article, so she put out a press release saying, hey, we're going to publish this paper proving Bigfoot DNA in this journal of, North American anthropomorphic whatever, right? And then you look at the journal, and it's a journal that she put together that she is publishing from her house on her blog. You know,
Right. It's like
that's
using the
not real
trappings of science, of like scientific
Exactly.
words to legitimize yourself.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. You know,
Well, speaking actually real quick, rather as a great question, I'd rather be squidding. SCU does peer review, but only within SCU, as I understand. Curious to know what Chris thinks about those papers, as am I, because some of the people involved, I really think they're very intelligent people, but that is something too that always leaves me feeling wanting, is that, well, cool, but that's not really, I want peer review from people who aren't just from within SCU, right? Because I feel like there's a bit of a confirmation bias there, most likely.
yeah, it's a really good question. So actually, full disclosure. So for a time, and I guess I still technically am, a review for some SCU journal articles. Just kind of in my free time. Those are not the same thing. They are not the same thing as a scientifically peer-reviewed paper from a panel of experts,
right?
In these different fields. Now, SCU does its best, right? Of course. And I don't know the full peer review process, but for example, the way that peer review is supposed to happen is, I did say full disclosure. That's hilarious. Somebody
you heard it
clip
here
that.
first.
Chris Cogswell said full disclosure. Somebody clip that quick. Put it on UFO Twitter. The way that peer review should happen essentially is you submit a paper, and that paper goes to an editor, and then the editor sends it out to peer reviewers who are anonymous.
Right.
And they get no info about you, everything else, but they are experts in the field of which you're publishing. So they'll look for people who are highly cited in the field in which you work. If you're publishing a paper, though, on the materials from UFO fragments, who are those experts?
Who are the experts?
Yeah. So part of this, it's sort of a bit of a cop-out, I guess, but part of this becomes a challenge because there isn't a base of experts from which to draw. Now there are material scientists, right? So the papers that I've seen have all had to do with material science, let's say, right? That's my kind of area of expertise. Those are the kind of things that I would be seeing. But, if somebody published a paper on, I don't know, aerodynamics of a flight pattern or whatever, or anything like that, that would have to go to someone else. So it is a self-published or kind of a group published journal is not the same thing and not up to the same quality standards as a journal article. Let's put it this way. Nothing against the SEU either, right? I think what they're doing is worth, worth their time. I think it's cool and everything else, right? I wouldn't have been a part if I didn't think it was cool and interesting. But if somebody finds evidence of a UFO ship, it is going to be published in Nature or Science.
Yes.
It is not going to be published in a white paper, right? Or in a low impact journal.
Right. Which leads to my next question. That's something I kind of game out in my head all the time is, do you think the stigma of the topic is preventing it from perhaps being taken on by more mainstream circles of academia? Which leads to my second question, though, which is, at the same time, though, what data is there really to cull from? It's kind of this chicken or before the egg problem, where I feel like there won't be data if there aren't scientific efforts to collect said data, but also there's no data right now to really even, perhaps there is on censors in the government. Who knows? We don't know because they're not telling, and they probably never will. So I guess, how does the scientific community engage in this topic, and should they be, I guess? And if so, how would they begin?
So the issue, I think, or one of the big problems with the UFO world that they don't seem to realize is that people have been doing science in this topic and in this arena for decades. And in some cases, they've been thinking about this for centuries.
Right.
One of the biggest challenges, I think, if you want the study of this stuff, one of the biggest differentiators between a science and a pseudoscience, and maybe pseudoscience is the wrong word. Some people say pseudoscience is like a it attacks new sciences or whatever, right? But let's say call it an emerging science, right? Because who knows? Maybe this will turn into a science. The main difference between an emerging science and an established science is a body of knowledge from which to build and a method to differentiate truth from lies. Neither of which the UFO subject has in any significant way.
Absolutely not. That second one is very prominent everywhere.
People have made attempts to do that, they are attacked or thrown out of the room. So for a time, MUFON was trying to develop, and actually along with some of the people that are now heads of the SEU, they were trying to develop a model where they could statistically analyze the cases MUFON was getting. And the way they did that was they had to pick some basis by which to call a case more likely to be real than another case. And it led to a tremendous schism. Because one of the things they said would make a case go into the not part of our study pile, right? Not even a don't believe it pile, just a not part of the study pile,
right?
Was the mention of a humanoid figure. So the study said, we just want to study lights in the sky. And people couldn't do it. They couldn't handle it. They were like, no, you have to include every experience or testimony we get as well. But that's not how science is done.
Yeah, I mean, witness testimony is like at the bottom of the list.
But even if you don't believe that, right? If I need to study,
right? Like, there's no data.
If I want to study, if I want to study the best way to make my plants grow, I don't also have to include every single tree I've ever seen.
Right.
Right. I can limit my study to learn about just the plants in my garden.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't happen in this kind of arena of a what's the word? An emergent science, So the idea of a so that's a huge issue.
Sure.
The other issue is that, frankly, a lot of the studies, I think Jazz is completely spot on there.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing while talking with you today.
A lot of it comes down to sort of interpersonal politics and everything else. But and just general politics too, right? What is hot at the moment versus not hot? There was a time where comparing aliens or UFO abductions or whatever to angels was so hot. It was the in thing, And now we're back to it being no, they're interdimensional, whatever is phasing in and out above someone's house, So that's one big challenge, right? There is no line of truth. There is no demarcation where we can say, I believe this story, or this story is more likely to be true to me than this story is. So because of that, there's really no way to move forward. You're kind of paddling forever in a circle. So that's a huge one. The other issue is that even when you do try to do those sorts of studies, right? So again, MUFON data is a good example of this, but so is the data, let's say, from even say the military data, right? The way that they're collecting the data is completely happenstance, So if you wanted to study the way, have you ever looked at old drawings of like cats or other animals from the medieval era?
Yes.
Okay. So listeners or people who are watching this now, what I want you to do is go and look up the way that artists thought that like whales and cats looked in the medieval era. They were working completely from witness testimony only.
Right.
And it is comical how wrong they are. Whales look like giant, like hippos. It's very odd. It's very, very strange. And so when you have this kind of, when you have witness testimony, there are ways to make it amenable to science, but no one is doing that now. And so that's kind of what the work at SkyHub was supposed to do. Yeah, there we go. Right. I mean, these are people just like, they're being they're being described what a cat looks like.
It's haunting.
Terrifying, right? So people are not, that was amazing. It's amazing.
That one never skips a day at the gym.
No, it's so good. Oh my god, look at that face. Oh, look at that punum, so cute. The issue
It's
we
a
end
new
up
feature of my show. I'm just going to be featuring medieval cat paintings for the
just
first
weird
5
cat
minutes
drawings.
every
I
show
like
now.
it. I like it. So and actually, this goes back to a point that was brought up earlier that I did want to mention about kind of being empathetic to people who claim to have experience. Oh my god, okay, I can't make this point right now with this cat picture. It's too perfect. The point about being empathetic to people, but not necessarily believing their story or their experience, right?
Right.
So, and it was, again, brought up by Laura. She said, important to talk to experiencers, but don't trust them as being legitimate. What I would say is something like this. If I wanted to study, there are different ways of looking at these fields. One way of looking at them, and one way of looking at them, Jazz is completely right about the cats being aliens. It's 100% true, 100% accurate. One way of looking at this field is looking at it from the perspective of a sociological phenomena. And for that kind of study or that kind of understanding, you can take in reports of something that happens to people. And actually, you sort of need to be separate from believing it's true or not.
Yes.
Especially if what you're trying to prove is whether it's true or not.
Right.
That sort of, it comes down to what's called falsifiability. You know, if you start looking for evidence of God, for example, you will never, you can't, well, let's take a different example, maybe a little hot button issue.
Fair enough.
A little bit of a less hot button issue. You can't prove the existence of something, right? You can't prove the existence of something. And so what science has sort of come to understand is that the best you can do is disprove the existence of things, or disprove hypotheses, essentially, not the existence of things, but disprove hypotheses.
Right.
So when you are, say, looking for evidence of aliens, right? If we built an amazing telescope to look for alien spaceships in the skies above us, if every single time our test of running that telescope is incorrect, if every single time we fail to capture an image of a UFO on our telescope, does that mean UFOs don't exist? Right. No, of course not. Right? We might just be not looking hard enough. That is not a way to learn anything about the universe. Because then you just are always left with your initial hypothesis.
Right.
And so hypotheses or tests have to be based on this idea that what you're proving is, or what you're trying to do is break down or break away from the hypothesis you've made. And so in terms of sort of understanding or empathizing with experiencers, but not making a judgment on what they experienced is true or not, I don't believe I have the knowledge either way to tell you if what you experienced happened to you or didn't happen to you. I wasn't there. I'm not in the room with you. I have no way of knowing. Right?
Right.
But what I do know is that you had something bad happen to you, right? You believe that something negative happened to you. And I think we both can see the effects of that event occurring, you know? And so I think it's worth investigating what these are. I can't say, either way, right? I mean, but it is important, I think, to be empathetic and understand that these things happen to people in other places, and that's in one of the ways one of my biggest issues with this whole government thing of getting involved in this and everything else. Their only interest is in military encounters.
Yes.
So it's again sort of one of those situations where, I think people are getting. Well, anyways, I can be a jerk about that any other time. But that's, I think in some cases people end up with these sorts of situations where everyone is too sure of themselves. I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't have the answer. You know what I mean?
If anyone is speaking with any 100% sureness about what's going on, who's talking to who about it, what they're thinking, they're that's them deciding they have decided what's going on because they're not talking about it. And that's kind of, I really wanted to bring that up for a minute because I think that's what is so, I know Zach Saichi has talked about this a lot too, where I'm actually rather annoyed with the government, and this, I guess, since it's the Navy they brought this topic up. They didn't have to talk about it. They did. They keep engaging on it, but they are not elaborating upon why they are doing what they are doing. And I think it is so dangerous because they, in a sense, are in they're talking about it in such a way where really anyone can see what they want to see.
Well, this is partly why I left. Partly why I left the Galileo project was this issue around if you're going to use a community of people to push a political agenda or to push, because that's what we're seeing in the UFO world is lobbying, right? Elizondo and Mellon are UFO lobbyists.
Yeah.
And
anyone pushing back, they've taken pictures of themselves at Capitol Hill. It's not
I don't mean that in a negative way.
Right. It's
right?
just the literal term.
That's just literally what they're doing, right? They're lobbying for UFO. Whether or not you think lobbyists should be involved in politics or whatever, they are lobbying the UFO effort to senators and to House members and the government in ways that are kind of beneficial to both parties in their mind, right? So beneficial to whatever their interests are and beneficial to what the government's interests are in terms of national security and everything else. But they're using a community of people whose interests are not aligned with theirs.
Yes.
And I don't think the entire time I've not thought that they're being truthful to that community of people, So that, I think, leads to sort of an ethical or moral dilemma where, again, if the government came out and said, we studied UFOs, we've studied this thing now for 10 years, we found no evidence of it, we think there's nothing to any of this, right? Because, again, what's more likely, right? If UFOs are real, they are rare. They're very, very rare, right? Mm-hmm. If they're real, they're very, very rare.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the government, who has lost mail of mine for years, all right, can't find UFOs. Let's say they can't do it. Then what happens? What happens then? What happens to this group of people who have now put all their interest in the government finding this answer?
Well, it'll
turn
around. There's for the sect of the community who I think have assigned needing to know that to their identity. I think there will be a very intense backlash, a dangerous one potentially, and then also kind of what you just said before about if they don't see anything, well then, the government's just covering it up. They're hiding what they found, or they just didn't look hard enough, So I can see that happening as well.
And what if the government finds something?
Right.
Then what happens? Right. It's militarized. It's used to surveil on the public further. It is used to, right. So I don't really think that the, I don't think that the public really has thought that, has really thought this through, and so I think that if you are, what's the word? I think that if you are going to be using this community to kind of get your ends forward, and push your ends towards the government and everything else, if you're going to be using that community for that, then I think you need to be truthful to them. And I also think that organizations like, say, Galileo or the SU or these other ones, I think that they have kind of a moral responsibility to become the arbiters of truth and fiction. If you're going to come forward and say, hey, we're going to look for UFOs, we're going to take this seriously scientifically, right? That means engaging on things like Bob Lazar's claims. That means engaging in things like the conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
That's what that means. It means you are now a leader, and so you need to lead. So that's I think part of the issue, and that actually is something that SETI has done, for example, right? So SETI has been studying this stuff. I think people would be surprised to hear about the work SETI does in terms of like exobiology and determining, thinking about what alien species might be like.
It's fantastic.
How would we travel the stars and everything else, right? So there are groups that are doing this, but just because the UFO world hasn't heard about them or hasn't learned about those studies before, doesn't mean that they're not happening. It just means that they're not being sort of advertised to you.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all very, I'll say this, it's interesting. That's kind of it's one of those things where I feel like it's this runaway train, and I don't know where it's going to fully end up, but it's all I can do is kind of like watch.
I got off of it, man.
Yeah.
I was like, this is a runaway train. It's gonna hit the bridge with a big missing piece soon.
Right.
One of the things that I've always sort of talked about or thought about was, let's say the government spends all of this money investigating UAP claims, and they don't find anything. I think the next question then will have to be, why the hell did we ever believe in this in the first place? What was the method by which the government was sort of pushed to study this?
Well,
and it's this.
Yes.
It honestly is the same thing that happened after, it's the same thing that happened, say, after, other unethical studies in the past, right? And not that this study is unethical necessarily or anything else, but if the government decides then to start spending all this money and everything else on this, then we find nothing from it, then that's also a pretty huge deal. And so
I think it could be very problem, but given everything, we're just the fights over budgets right now, if it turns out they spent X amount of years and however many millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on something, and it turns out nothing, I think that'll be a big issue. We're going to wrap up this hour soon, but sorry, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the bill, right? In the bill amendment proposal from Gillibrand and everyone else, there's an entire section on getting insurance for building rockets that'll explode thousands of tons worth of TNT explosive. Right? Of like, saying like, well, what happens if our spaceship explodes in our faces?
Right.
Where is that coming from? I know that we don't even have a good picture of a UFO yet. Why are we building a rocket? What's going on?
I think this might have been, I didn't read that. That might be part of a separate bill. Or I missed it.
No, it's indemnity. So it's page, what page is it here? Hold on. It's in the scientific technological section here. Under section D. Yeah, if you look for indemnity, right? So it's interesting. Yeah.
That's hilarious. Well, we'll go into that all the next hour very soon. I just want to leave it with one more thought.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm a moron. Never mind. Ignore me.
Oh,
that's super funny. It's under a different heading.
No, when we were just talking about this, the way it's written, it was like government, like this is written in a way to be confusing. Because not only is the language thing, but the headings, because I did the same thing. I started reading the next section thinking it was part of the same thing. And I was like, what does this have to do with UAPs? What is going on? And only until I realized that they had completely moved on to something new. But really, really quick, I think you touched upon something that's so important. There's that why did the government, members of Congress, whoever's involved, why are they convinced there was something there to look at? Why are members of these committees who are, members of the Gang of Eight, who have supposed to have complete oversight over, military and our intelligence. Why are they pursuing this? And if the fact that now they have written this bill, I just hope that some journalists can finally ask them that, because I have wanted them to ask them that since I've gotten into this topic, because really all one can do is say either there's something there for them to act upon. What is it? And that's when our imaginations could go wild, or there's bad intelligence. And what is it? And the fact that question hasn't even been asked of them directly to them, blows my mind. And maybe now that we're actually spending some real money on it, I really hope it does. I mean, do you agree that I think that'd be some great to have some clarity on why they're doing what they're doing?
So I will say, so first off, I'll say one of the other important things I think that's lacking from this area or this field is when someone makes a mistake, they say that they made a mistake, right? I just made a mistake, right? I read the wrong section there, and
Sure.
I said, hey, I think it's part right. It's a mistake. It's fine.
Yeah.
It happens.
It's
But
great.
we need
It's fine.
People need to own up to those mistakes. Anyways, all right, whatever. So just wanted to clarify that was a mistake. All right. I think one of the so I actually think that you are correct. I think that a hugely important part of the question is I think an important part of the question is what is it that made them interested in this topic, right? So why is it that they believe that this is here? Yeah. And I actually think that the UFO subject, and especially just like other communities like the UFO community online, is also a particularly good place or way to study the spread of propaganda and misinformation. So I would not be surprised if what actually comes from this, or part of what comes from this, and I've said this for a very long time and been called all kinds of names for it and whatever, but I still think it's true. I wonder at the end of this, if they do find nothing, how much of the lessons learned from this or the study of this will be, how did pseudoscience or conspiracy theory or whatever, how did that get, what's the word? How much of that, or how did that happen, I guess I'll say, right? So
yeah, absolutely. This is all nothing. This is great. What's happening right now is nuts.
Exactly.
Nuts.
So that's actually, I think, a very real concern.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that one of the big concerns should be, and again, this has sort of been I used to joke about this when I was on other shows, that the last thing the UFO community wants really is a light shown on it, because then people are going to start investigating people like Stephen Greer or Walcott. Sure. and these great people that are literally making money off of people they're scamming, right? Absolutely. So that's the last thing I think that most people in the UFO community actually want. I think on the other hand, though, that if they do study this and there's nothing to it, we find nothing, those senators are now in a very, very uncomfortable situation.
Absolutely.
Right. And I mean, imagine
some of them with presidential hopes.
Yes. Right. So, the way that I look at this is, imagine, do you feel confident enough in the data, the UFO data information? Sorry, Walcott, my bad.
Okay. It's a Boston version.
Yeah. It's the Boston version. There we go. Are we confident enough in the UFO information that's out there to have the government spend loads of money on it? I don't think we are. I don't think the UFO community knows what it's gotten itself into.
Maybe. You may be right. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, this is what sucks. Like, we don't know.
Yeah, we have no idea. Right? I could be wrong. Listen, I might just be a cynical jerk, right? But
no, you're not a jerk. I think it's important to hear every possibility. It is a possibility. There's no one should be able to say that's impossible, because we don't know. There's nothing wrong. There's not being a jerk by saying that's a possibility.
Sure, but one thing I'll say too, right? So someone even just asked this in the chat, right? If there's nothing to this, then what's been happening for the last 70 years? So here's an example of maybe what could have happened, right? Because I agree. For me, the number of Bigelow adjacent folks makes me very nervous, right? Because they have not exactly been stellar pillars of the scientific community, and the search for truth, right? But anyways, if we think about, let's think about the way that this could have gone, right? And tell me if you think this sounds likely. All right. So, have you ever, you've heard the story of Theranos, right? Or Theranos?
Yes.
Okay. The way that con worked was they took this sort of sciencey sounding idea, They got some sort of scientific people to invest in it and say that they thought this was real. They then tricked one rich person. And because that rich person was tricked, they were able to trick others into investing. And eventually, they had so much investment money that they were able to trick government officials and the media into covering them and other people and everything else. And eventually, when the con fell apart, there was nothing at the center of it. The data, the thing didn't work. There was nothing to show that it ever worked. There was no science behind it, anything. Okay? That's why they call it a con. It's confidence. Confidence is what sells it, right? And confidence in human hubris. You don't want to think that you'll ever be tricked. Okay?
Sure.
So let's think about this, right? And I'm not saying this is what happened, but let's think about this. All right? Let's say that the people working on UFOs get their friends who are journalists with affiliations to the New York Times to publish a story about a project they did through funding with a rich friend, Harry Reid. If the New York Times publishes it, do you think it would be easy to get other media to report on it as if it was true? Because the New York Times must have checked, right? The New York Times must have done their due diligence. There's no way the New York Times would just publish the story from friends of the people that are in the article, right? And so then if the New York Times verified it, then it's good enough for CNN and Fox and everyone else. Yeah. And if it's good enough for CNN and Fox and everyone else, must be good enough for your local newspaper and your friends and family and everyone else.
That's the thing. You would hope that other news organizations are doing their own corroboration too,
dumb.
but
Really
are they?
dumb.
That's the question. That's the question. Right. Oh, I guess big media found Chris.
Oh, my bad. This is the way every single con in history has been played.
Oh, wait, real quick. While we're on top of the hour, I'm going to bring in some more people. We're going to keep talking about this. I'm going to bring in the myth, the man, the legend. He can even add himself if he wanted to, but I'll add him now. Lou Jimenez.
Hey, what's up, guys?
What up, Lou?
How you doing? Good conversation.
I want to verify, though, too. I just want to say, I'm not saying that is what happened, right? I don't know.
No, right. This is.
But I'm saying
we're spitballing.
That's a very real possibility that everyone is saying isn't, right? It's a real possibility.
Well, I can tell you this. If they spend $1 billion in 5 years, say, or 10 years, and they come to the conclusion that there's nothing there, number one, we have to accept it. Have to.
It's not going to happen.
I know, but I feel like in 10 years, we'll have a pretty good idea of where this conversation is going to go. And
real quick,
two,
I'm going to have to jump off and I'm going to continue this on the phone. I have to go to work.
All right, Miller.
Great talk, everybody. I'll be back in audio form only soon. And
Later.
You will bring Jazz Shaw on, sir.
Yep, I certainly will. And thank you, Ty, for the $5 donation. Truly appreciate it. Yeah, so, and I also think, there's going to be a conversation of how the hell did this happen? How did we spend $1 billion on this topic that we knew there was nothing to? And there's going to be a launch or an investigation into how that happened. And I think at that point, maybe you see some arrests and people going to jail if they're still alive.
It didn't, but that's the thing, right? That's exactly what happened with, let's say, Project Blue Book, right? Or other efforts to study UFOs. Is the government studies them, comes out and says there's nothing to this, and then a conspiracy theory builds around it, right? So, listen. I think that the people seeing something should be listened to. I think that the people who have said they have experiences should be listened to. I think all of those stories are valid and worthwhile being collected and dissected and looked at. I just don't know if, I just don't think that if the government comes out and says there's nothing to this, all it will do is inflame the subject, because that's exactly what's happened before, Right.
Interesting. Well, I mean, the thing, I feel like the big difference is, though, now is we got some pretty notable pilots that are corroborating some of the things that people are seeing. And I think those are the people that are being put in front of lawmakers right now. And couple that with whatever sort of classified reports they're seeing on this topic is what's pushing this. That's what I want to believe. But I totally understand where you're coming from. And it's an avenue that has to be at least considered.
Yes, my whole thing is always that you have to look at this from the null hypothesis, right? Because again, what is the most just based on everything we know about the universe, it's just I think that people have not really what's the word? I don't know if I had gone on to UFO Twitter 4 years ago or on a UFO podcast 4 years ago and said that the end result of all of this would be the creation of a government office to study UFO reports for the creation of military technology, people would have called me a crazy conspiracy theorist and anti-UFO skeptic. Right? They would have been like, it's all doom and gloom. What are you talking about? Whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's what happened, man.
All right. Well, let's hey, guys, just in case you don't know what's going on, we're gonna extend Daniel Miller's show for an extra hour, just because we had some news break on this law that's we'll talk about it. Hopefully it gets signed into law within the next before the end of the year, and we're going to talk about that progress right now, and we're going to bring in Jazz Shaw. Jazz, sir, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here and always rocking the awesome UCR merch, which, by the way, guys, the link is in the description below. So if you haven't got yourself a Dolphin TikTok shirt, go check it out.
Get in there.
Get in there. Get in that Dolphin Empire while you can. Okay, so Jazz, where do we begin with today? And well, I guess before we get there, what do you think of sort of the last thing that Chris is saying here? That if we do end up signing this Gillibrand Amendment or the version of it that seems to be floating around right now, in 10 years or in 5 years, when we look at this and we determine, it's actually just either, they probably would never tell us it's US tech, but they would either write it off as an atmospheric condition or not write it off, but actually come to the conclusion of there's nothing non-human about this phenomenon. What do you think would
I
sort of
wouldn't
be
entirely write off the idea that the government might try to say that. I personally feel, I totally disagree, by the way, but it's only for personal reasons. I mean, I've seen it. You've seen it. There's some weird crap out there, and if that's our tech or the Russians or the Chinese, that's either, well, it's pretty much scary no matter
what it is or who,
what the answer is. That's, for me, I've already kind of moved past that because I already know it's real, and so now we're waiting to see what the government's going to do with it. And for me, the debate that's going on with the Gillibrand Amendment and the NDAA, which we're going to talk about tonight, I think there's a lot of data out there that we might be able to gather. How much everybody's going to believe it is up to the individual. If you haven't seen it, then you're just relying on, oh man, the government's just lying to us again, or, oh, that sounds totally plausible. It's if you don't have any access to any data yourself, it's going to be a point of contention. But I'm very encouraged by what's been happening today.
Hey, we got Ryan Robbins, Post Disclosure World, aka UFO Jesus, in the house. Welcome,
UFO
dude.
Jesus.
Thank you for being here. There's potential legal repercussions to blatantly lie about this issue. If the United States government were to come out and repeat their statements from 1969 or 2011, I would be impressed with that and give it weight. What do you think of that?
I think that so here's the thing too, right? I think that a lot of us are talking about we're sort of getting caught up in two different questions, right? I suspect that if and I have no reason to disbelieve the people that are reporting things, right? I mean, I have no reason to disbelieve any of them. Do I know what they saw? No. It might be foreign tech. It might be aliens. I don't know, right? I really have no way of saying either way. But what I'm sort of interested in, or I guess part of what why I'm interested in it, is with the factionalization that happens in the community of UFO belief, kind of the world of UFO belief. it's sort of like if the government came out and said that they had an answer to this, it was sort of like if all the world leaders got together and said, hey, by the way, that Mormonism thing was totally the right one. You know, a lot of people would say to hell with that, right? I don't believe any of that. I'm going away. I'm going to keep doing my own thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, the sort of part of it, I guess, that's interesting, or the thing that I think is sort of fascinating about this is that the number one, the sort of mythology that exists, the mythology that's part of UFO, the UFO subject or culture, is sort of independent of it. It's been with us since the beginning of civilization. So that part, I think, will not change or be affected by this government legislation at all or anything, you know? But I do wonder still sort of about, or a kind of question, I guess, a community that so quickly shifts from thinking the government is going out there and purposefully attacking UFO believers and making, a couple years ago, we were talking about how the government made Paul Benowitz kill himself, right? Because he said he saw UFOs.
Right.
Going from that level of distrust and disbelief in the government to then saying, no, it's cool though that they're now studying this. I really want the government involved. That's kind of interesting. How did that happen? Right? Like, how did that shift happen? Why did that
Well,
shift happen?
I think it's because of the legitimacy that the New York Times brought with it. I think that's part of it, because I think it brought a whole new way. I mean, for me, I've always been interested in the topic, but then when I saw the topic in my face, that solidified it for me. But on the show, I try my best to not bring that bias to the way we think on the show. We don't want echo chambers on the show. We don't want to be fooled. Like, I don't want to be fooled when it comes to this. And I'm also open to the idea of a very old memory being misinterpreted. But there's a lot of things about this memory that, for me, just, I believe it was what I remember is not 100% accurate. It can't be, but it is, at the core, it is what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
But even with that said, I mean, I would never have spoken about this, especially as an actor in Los Angeles. This topic does me zero favors. It wins me zero popularity contests. It doesn't elevate my presence as an actor at all. If anything, it kind of takes away from it, because I could be working on other things. But with that said, I would have never spoken about this pre-2017, and now here we are in 2021, right? And
whatever year it is.
I woke up dizzy this morning, had to go to urgent care and get it checked out. Everything's cool, but it was just a weird day for me. I think I have a little bit of vertigo, maybe an ear infection. Who knows? But I digress. So I think it brought a new wave of thinkers and people into the conversation that don't have, I don't want to call it baggage, but the history of the last 60, 70 years. They're not scorned by Roswell. They're not scorned by the Project Blue Book. They're not scorned by Paul Benowitz, and I think the conversation is shifting a little bit in that direction.
Right. But I guess what I would ask, or what I guess what I would argue is, if you would you want a mechanic to be fixing your car who had never seen a car before or ever heard of a car before?
No.
Okay. So some information, some knowledge of the subject is important to make good claims, right? Or to kind of understand things, right? The context, the history of the subject is important, I think. You can be interested in getting involved in it and new to the subject and everything else. That's great, right? I think it's awesome that people are getting into this. But at the same time, not knowing about those histories, not knowing about those issues, and the things we learn from them, right? We did learn things from the cases with
not so much know about them, but don't have the emotional baggage that's connected to it that some people do, because it's been part of their belief system for 40 or 50 years.
Sure.
When I read Roswell now as an adult, I can say, okay, well, maybe that was just a spy satellite system that somebody misunderstood. There's a million things that it could have been, or maybe it was something that actually crashed and it was really weird. But to me, it's like, can I put it on the desk of a senator and convince them, or a scientist for that matter, the answer is no. I don't think I could take anything from the last 60 years and put it on any serious thinker's desk and say, hey, this is real, check this out. I think they would check it out and they'd come back no, I don't believe you. I don't believe
I completely agree, which is why sort of that's been the one consistent drumbeat I guess I've had this entire time, right? Was the people who helped build that 70 years of failure we should be ignoring, right? But that's not what's happening.
But here's the thing, and maybe Jazz, we're going to bring you in here because I know you're just sitting here and you're listening, but I want to get your opinion on this before we.
Oh, dude, I'm, whenever. I mean, I got a lot of stuff to say to Chris.
I know you do. I know you do.
You guys go.
No, but this is an interesting part of the conversation. No, I mean, I think this is a conversation. And here's Daniel Miller from the road, from the 110 here in California. Thanks, Miller, for being here. But
yeah, I'm gonna mute myself unless I'm talking, so you don't hear all the car noises.
Awesome, no worries, buddy. So God, that threw off my train of thought. But what was I saying? I'm sorry.
You were talking about Benowitz, who, by the way, as far as I'm concerned, Benowitz was killed by the United States government. I mean, in my mind, there's no doubt. But a lot of people see it a different way. I get that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, let us continue. I forgot what my point was, but I feel like
I'm just saying that's what Chris was talking about. So
no, for sure. Thank you, Jess. But I think.
Well, no. Well, hold on though. So
yeah.
Okay, so Jazz, if you think that Benowitz was killed by the government, why do you believe he was killed? Like, why do you think he was killed by the government?
No, I don't think he was killed. I think he was driven to
suicide. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. But because he had discovered evidence of drone technology, because like what would be the purpose of them driving him to kill himself?
No, because he had caught on to something that probably related to a secret program.
Okay.
And somebody was sent, and we already know. Do we all have to say the name, who it was?
We don't, but yes, okay, yep.
Who went and said, oh, well, this guy's causing trouble, so we're going to go feed him a bunch of bogus information and then turn him around and do this whole psyop thing on him, and then he eventually killed himself. But I mean, it was a tragic story.
Yeah, no, I agree. The situation is terrible. But so then why then should we trust the government now to treat this subject any better?
I'm sorry, who on this show are you asking if we should trust the government?
Yeah, Jazz definitely doesn't trust the government.
Not you, but I'm saying, like, I guess what I'm asking, or I guess what I'm wondering, Jazz, is, so what is your take on this amendment then?
Oh, we're going to do a whole show on that. Are we going to launch into that right now?
Maybe in a sec. Well, let's see if we can segue. But that's what I was trying to get to the point of why should we trust the government now? I'm not saying we should trust the government, but the difference is now I feel like the government is opening it up to science, giving essentially the permission to science not to mock this anymore. And so you get. Well, what about SETI? They're not looking in the lower atmosphere for things.
SETI doesn't have any interest in extraterrestrials.
But neither is Galileo. Right?
Well, no,
they're looking for other Oumuamuas.
No, they're going to be looking in the lower atmosphere with the optics that they're going to be using. I think they're going to be doing both.
Yeah, they're doing both. Yeah.
They're thinking about doing that, right? But the main focus of the astrologers, or the astronomers, I should say, excuse me, on Galileo is deep space probes and deep space analysis.
I mean, from talking to Avi Loeb a few times, that's not the impression I got. The impression I got is if we're taking a picture and we see a United States emblem on it, then we know that it's not an alien spacecraft. But if we see an emblem from a different planet with different writings that was not compatible with Earth, and we see metal folded, or if we see structure to it, then we could say, I mean, I've in the 3 times that we've spoken to him, I've never once heard him say that he'll be looking for another Oumuamua with smaller telescopes, I'm imagining, than he would have access to at Harvard or any other institution of learning like that.
So that is, they have multiple different stuff going on, right? Let me say that. And I recently left Galileo.
Right.
So there are different parts of what they're working on, right? But for example, the work that say SkyHub was doing, and then the work that Sky 360 is currently doing, would do that project for $1,000 each camera, right? You could build one of those sensors. Everyone listening to this could build a sensor like that, right? It's a camera.
Right.
Just a camera running 24/7 above your house, right? It does not require a tremendous amount of effort or inventiveness to do it, right? And so I guess one of the questions would be then, why, if we can build these things for $1,000, if we can build these sorts of sensor systems and everything else, right?
And you can't. You're saying something totally false. But no, we can't do that. But go ahead.
You can't build you
can build a sensor for $1,000. How much data are you going to gather? How much ability do you have to block out false signals to, determine what was something really anomalous and what was something totally normal? You're not doing that for $1,000. I have problems with some of the Galileo project stuff, by the way, but not what you're saying. No, that's like saying you're basically making the same argument, Chris, that a lot of people say, well, everyone has a cell phone in their pocket. Why don't we have better pictures of UFOs? Well, those cell phones kind of suck, and you really need better equipment and the ability to go and gather good data,
So
it's not as easy as pulling a cell. Luis will tell you, I've seen the Tic Tac twice. I filmed it once. The film was crap. All right. It was terrible. I had a guy that went and did a rendition of the whole thing and broke it down and published it.
What is the major data point that people point to with UFOs as being anomalous if they're points in the sky? What is the major point there, Jazz?
Oh, if it's points in the sky, I have no idea. I was talking about something I saw that was a very large physical craft right in front of my eyes in broad daylight.
Okay, so barring you taking a bad picture of a giant physical craft in front of you in broad daylight, if you have a light in the sky that is behaving anomalously, right? What we mean by anomalous movement of those craft is non-ballistic motion, okay?
Right.
Which means that it moves like this, okay? It moves around
Right.
quickly, okay? That is literally a first-year computer science project in computer vision to do, to scale, right? It's very, very simple. Everyone here could load up OpenCV. We could follow the tutorial together, and you could do that, right? That's not hard. So the information you would need, the data sets you would need, would not be all that significant in terms of what you're saying, right? To show non-ballistic motion statistically, right?
What if you saw shooting stars?
That's ballistic motion. A shooting star goes in a straight line path.
Might be.
Shooting stars stop abruptly and then turn 90 degrees?
Well, no, then that's a UFO.
Non-ballistic motion, which you can track using OpenCV.
Right.
Which is free software available for anybody with a security camera.
So what you're saying is you could pick up.
I realize how angry you are, Chris. I get it. The people who have never seen it, they're really
Jazz, I'm not angry, dude. I didn't come on here and start attacking you. You did it to me.
No, I'm not attacking you. I'm just saying
that's what you did.
The video is often crappy. Are you saying we have really great video of every light in the sky that does something?
What I'm telling you is that if you look in the scientific record, the very first cameras to do what SkyHub was trying to do are Baker Nunn cameras. They were built in the 1960s by the U.S. Not by the U.S. government, but by different universities. I have the paper someplace. Chris Rutowski can give them to you as well. those studies used they just, you know how when you take a low shutter speed image of something with light, it shows a streak of light, right?
Sure.
They used that to get low resolution images of satellites in the sky to measure their positions in the 60s.
Sure.
Why can't we do that today? You don't think we have the technology to do that today when we had it in the 60s?
I think we have the technology. Yeah.
So I guess I just sort of don't understand. I sort of don't understand, I guess, why you don't think that people could build those sorts of systems, right? I mean, we have people who are taking. So you just basically don't think that the SkyHub process or Sky 360 or any of those other projects, UFO DAP, UFO data, any of those are possible.
They're totally possible. But aren't we talking about
that's what we just talked about.
When are you recording something? What are you recording? Because I became known as kind of the UFO guy, I've had friends in media that have called me and said, I just saw a UFO or a bunch of UFOs. And I asked them to describe it. It was like, it was this line of dots that were going across the sky. They were definitely not stars. And I went and checked, and I had to sadly tell them that was Elon Musk stuff. You know, people see stuff all the time that is not anomalous. That's not, extraterrestrial probably or whatever. There's stuff out there you see there's people that see Chinese lanterns, and I can understand, like somebody says, wow, that was really weird. And then you look at their video and it's like, well, that is kind of weird, but it's probably Chinese lanterns or maybe drones or something. And it just sounds to me, Chris, like you're making a blanket statement, like, because none of those were real, because somebody made a misinterpretation, then everything is fake.
Chaz, I think you're arguing with a straw man of me created by UFO Twitter. I don't know if people are seeing real things
Chris.
or not.
All right. No, I mean, I'm just saying I've seen it. So, but
I don't know what you saw. All I said was that we can build those sensors as a community if we wanted to, for relatively cheaply, using the Sky 360 software, the software of UFO DAP or other groups like that. That's all I said. And then you said I was 100% wrong, and then started coming for me hard.
I'm sorry. When did I say you were?
Well, I think it's
wrong?
you guys are sort of two boats crossing in the night here. I think what Christopher is saying is that, or Chris is saying that we already have the technology. We've had it for a long time to locate these anomalous trajectoried objects, and we're not doing it.
Right, and that's what he's saying. And
that's
what I'm saying is that we don't need the government to study this. We can study it ourselves at home.
Right. But I think the difference is now that there's at least a social permission that doing something like that might be worthy of your time. Whereas before, I think you'd just be a lot more hard pressed, because like in the 1960s, we may have had camera systems that do that, but they didn't cost $1,000. They're not as cheap as they were today. I feel like the technology's in the right spot. The social media, the way people get information is in the right spot. So maybe, and that's why we're seeing, the SkyHub, the Sky 360, the Galileo project, and all of these independent, citizen driven organizations coming out and starting to do this. But we got to give them a chance.
I think citizen science is definitely the way to go on this. I don't think that the government should be involved, really. I mean, I can understand why they want to be involved, right, for issues of national security or whatever. But I don't really think that's a great idea. One of the core kind of principles of SkyHub was that we did not want to be sold to the government, right? We didn't want our system to go into the government and be used by them.
But I think for me, I think you could do both. I don't understand why we can't have both. Like for me,
Thank you, Luis. Yeah. Thank you. That's all I'm saying. There's a bunch of videos out there that Chris could go look at and go, oh, that's garbage. And I would look at him and go, that could definitely be garbage, but keep collecting the data. That's all. I'm just saying, oh, well, the cameras are good enough. So if there was anything out there, we'd already know, because we would have had video, right?
It's not what I
I
said.
don't agree with that. You know,
Yeah, no, I think
We
Chris.
agreed there, Jazz.
I think Chris just wants to leave the government out of it completely. I think he's saying citizen science and university science,
I'm all
and
for
and
citizen
and
science.
doing it a scientific way without any involvement with the government whatsoever. And a lot of people have this idea or have this opinion about how this conversation should be had. In my opinion, I think. And this is where we're going to just differ. It doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm right and I'm right, you're wrong. It just means we have different opinions. I think you can't have this conversation without the president of the United States. You know, if it turns out to be a real phenomenon, I think the government's going to have a hand in it, whether you want it to or not. Because they have the best collecting data systems on the planet. They just do. All of them are classified. But if it gets to a point where they have to talk about this, they have, I believe, a trove of data that they can use and rely on to talk about this in an intelligent way if it comes to that point. And as a taxpayer, for me, if I'm paying all of these, helping pay all of these, billions and billions and billions of dollars in defense spending, I want a little bit of access to it when it comes to something that I saw that I want answers on. That's it. I think that's where we differ. And I think from Chris's standpoint, the mathematics of it are a lot less like what's, and I'll agree with you here. What's more mathematically possible? That human ingenuity has figured out a different kind of propulsion system and it's a top secret, United States Air Force craft, or that things from another planet are coming to visit our planet. I mean, like I would go with the first one. If you had to push me, that would be the first place I'd go, because I don't put anything past human ingenuity. But at the same time, there are, just like you said, there's a totality here that would be completely overlooked and missed if we went with that first option. And that is the human experience, the human testimony aspect of this. People are experiencing something. So we have to answer a lot of questions. It's not just one question we have to answer. And
Absolutely.
for me, there's a multitude of ways to get there, including, citizen science and without government involvement whatsoever. I think we could do both. Is that fair?
Totally fair. In my
mean,
opinion,
yeah.
I'll let Chris speak to that, but in my opinion, it's just a collection of data. That's all we're talking about. It's a collection of data, and I could ask Chris. I mean, we had 3 videos in 2017, 2018 that came out. Do you believe those were seagulls? I mean, were
That's
those
Mick West, a different skeptic.
okay? No, let's leave Mick West out of this for a moment. Do you think that you have a reasonable explanation to go, oh, that was all crap?
Dude,
Because
I don't know.
I thought some of them looked unusual. I don't know what the answers are, but I do think it wasn't easily dismissible.
So neither do I. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, then we're probably on the same page.
I just think that, again, the issue with, there's a difference between skepticism and belief in either way, right? Belief that it must be, the type of skepticism you're talking about is the skepticism that says, since the universe works this way, everything that does not fit that world view must not be real. That is not the kind of skepticism I've ever advocated for. What I am advocating for is, we don't know. We don't know. So maybe let's not sell the government on the idea that they are aliens or that they are foreign tech or that they are, we don't know. We don't know what they are.
Well, I don't think the government's being sold that it's aliens.
No,
They're being pushed. They're being pushed that it is a defense issue.
Correct.
right.
That needs to be looked at, right? Which maybe it is, right? Which it seems like it would be. If pilots are reporting something, that should be investigated. The only thing I've ever advocated for is, what happens if the UFO world is wrong? Right?
That's a fair question.
What happens to this? What happens to this?
What if there's no God? What if there's no anything? I mean, I don't disagree with Chris. Everything you're saying, I actually completely agree with. I'm just saying, we have the government saying, oh, well, we recorded these videos, we have these things. We don't know what they are. The government has never once said, oh, those are aliens. It's like,
Yep.
We don't know what it is.
But I would also
But
say,
if anybody wants to come up and say, well, because the government can't say they're aliens, then it's clearly something terrestrial or
well,
something prosaic.
I
You know,
understand. I also understand.
I don't see that.
I understand your fear of, well, what if the community is wrong, right?
Sure.
If the community's wrong on this, they'll get over it. But just because that shouldn't be a reason why we shouldn't give them the permission to look into it.
No. See, what I'm saying, I guess, is so the I'm interested in
Holy
this
shit.
in a I'm interested in this in a way that I guess is sort of different or kind of not what most people expect or think about, right?
Mhm.
Which is I try to look at this from the perspective of the people who have actually had experiences and sort of the community itself of people who believe these things, right? You know,
I'm gonna get deep shit with that line.
yeah, exactly, right? They'll get over it, right?
Well, I mean, you know, they have
so-
before.
So
They have before.
I actually don't think I don't think that people would get over it. I think that it would sort of inflame things further, you know. And so I think that again, that's sort of one of the things with this, right? I kind of look at what's the word? I sort of look at this I sort of look at all of this in this community as being sort of a double-edged sword, right? You have a lot of people who are very, very passionate about this subject, and that can lead to some things that are maybe not what people want, right? Like trolling and bullying and harassment and whatever, right? And just like other communities of people who are very, very passionately investigating something online, even if you think it's something worthwhile investigating, right? Look at the groups of people who investigated, say, the Boston bombings, right? Found the wrong person and then basically, you know, attacked them online for days. That sort of use of a community of people without any regard for the power the community has or the people in the community itself can be very dangerous. That's the only thing I've advocated for from the beginning, kind of continuously, right? Just sort of using a community to push a political agenda is not I don't think is a good thing.
I'm done.
Here's my question, I guess, though, is we're making an assumption when we assume it's a political agenda, because none of us really know what is being said in these briefings or who's even giving the briefings. We don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, so we're kind of left to read the tea leaves. But for all we know, it may come out that, yes, you're right, this is all just utilizing a community to get someone's way, or this could be a legitimate defense problem and they just really don't know what's going on, and there's sensor data suggesting something really technically advanced. I mean, it's just one of those things where we have to be aware of the assumptions we're making as we're talking about it, and that's true for everybody.
Like Jared
Luis,
said,
can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
We had an agreement. We discussed earlier. I'm not saying an agreement. A thing that was going to happen. Are we actually doing a show to talk about?
We are. We've definitely gotten sidetracked here with a conversation.
I gave you an hour.
You
It's
did.
now 8:45.
Quarter to
We're
9.
still sitting here talking to Chris about all this crap and nothing to do with the bill. And
All right,
really,
Jess,
I'm running out of time.
I know you
So
are.
if we're not
All right.
if we're not going to do that, then you can sit here and do the whole conspiracy thing.
Jazz,
but
we're
not
Jazz, we're gonna do it. We just got a little sidetracked here with a conversation. I think
No,
you're
it's
right.
not a little sidetracked. It's been a long time.
Okay,
all right, guys,
agreed.
I'm
Agreed.
gonna leave. It was I would like to have said it was fun. I will talk to you guys later.
All right, Chris. We'll see you soon, buddy.
I'm
All right.
sorry, man. It's your show. But you asked me to come on and talk about a certain thing, and I told you, and we're not going to go into personal matters of what I have going on in my life with my family,
You're right.
and I made the time for this, and we've blown out most of the show.
I hear what you're saying,
So-
Jazz, but just know that it wasn't intentional. Okay.
I know it wasn't intentional,
Okay. All right.
but
So
is Jane not
so-
available? Or are we not?
No,
doing
no,
this?
Jane's not
Or-
available. Dan's on the road. All right, let's get into the bill because that's why you're here, right? So let's get into it. Where would you like to start?
Wherever you want to.
Well, all right. So it seems like we've gotten some changes to the Gillibrand Amendment. It sounds like it's going to get signed. I guess let's start with the changes. What are the biggest differences between the First Amendment and the new updated verbiage to it?
Wow, there's a lot. It has changed a lot.
Yeah.
At the top line, I would say the biggest thing for a lot of people who've been pushing for Astro, the name Astro is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly that might have been a sort of a sop to the Pentagon, and they've been pushing back on this. But we may be stuck with the new weird, how are we pronouncing this? AOIM, Oimizig office. That may be happening. So the last language we got, it may go with that.
Okay.
There's a lot of good stuff that's left in there. Most of it, I think, is good. There are a few areas where there are gaps. I would say one of the first ones is the final language we've seen so far includes things like adverse physiological effects for people that have encountered UAP. That's still in there, so that's good. Huge big item. Public reports annually. Those are in there. They weren't in the OIMIZIG thing.
Mm-hmm.
We need a better name for this, dude. But yeah, there's regular public reports in there. What's the next big thing? Oh yeah, coordinating with other departments. There was a change that I thought wasn't as powerful as in the Gillibrand Amendment. Not as strong. They're directing, for example, FAA, NASA, Homeland Security, NOAA, Department of Energy. But there's two parts to this. Now they're saying coordinating instead of directing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm just trying to make sure I get the notes right. It also says the Secretary and DNI shall ensure, big word, that each element of the intelligence community with data related to unidentified aerial phenomena make such data available immediately, big word, to the UAP office. And that goes back to the fact that we kind of lost the name of the office.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we're going with the weird acronym office after the negotiation.
Well,
Because
it's just called the office now, right?
the office, yeah,
Maybe it has a new name coming down the road.
maybe. But one of the points I wanted to bring up with you is that I think the negotiations between the House and the Senate, they weren't in there alone. There were people from the DoD, there were people from the Pentagon, intelligence agencies that were in on the negotiations before this came out. And there's several reasons for that.
Okay.
But the fact the name dropped out, I found that a little bit curious. I mean, we don't know. I've been going back and forth with our friend from the ice cream truck and other people all day. Yeah, that name dropped off. Astro is no longer a thing. So it's probably going to be the weird MSG name, you know. But oh god, there was so much stuff here. But yeah, the Department of Energy was one of the ones that was supposed to be under the Gillibrand Amendment being called in and called down and like you're now going to, provide information. That one, that got a weird little thing. The stuff about the DOE and UAP incidents around nuclear facilities, and anybody who wants to follow along, this is on page 1500, section N, includes the language that such investigations will be done, quote, in consultation with the Administrator for Nuclear Security. That was a weird thing, and not a lot of people have picked up on this. The person they're talking about would be Jill Ruby, the Undersecretary for Nuclear Investigations. And where does she work? In the United States Department of Energy, the administrator for the National Nuclear Security Administration. You can search for comments from her all you want. You won't find her. She's basically a ghost. But she was involved, probably inadvertently, through the conversations that brought us to this point. And the Department of Energy is trying to make sure they're not pinned down too much. But anybody listening, go try to look her up. She basically doesn't exist. So
interesting. I just wanted to. Jane also had written a couple of things that she found that were interesting as far as differences, and then we'll get to you, Miller, to see what your thoughts are on the day's events. But she said the Office of the Secretary of Defense will now establish the office versus the Department of Defense in general. There is other oversight given to the Secretary as well throughout the updated amendment. UAP briefings to include all UAP incidents from the last year. I think this is more comprehensive than before. More focus has been given to line organizations that will help study the data, including adding a definition for it, and that the Transmedium Office Committee is no longer included in the amendment. So those are some of the things that she also had picked up on. I figured I'd throw them in here since she's not here. But Miller, what are your thoughts on, I know you've been sort of looking at this all day and giving people updates. So what are the things you're excited versus not excited about, I guess? If he's here. Miller, you still there? Oh, maybe not. I think we lost Miller. He was on the road. Okay, well, the same question to you, Jess. Yeah. I mean, I guess...
I thought Jane's analysis was really good, and I went through a lot of that when I was writing my own up. The new office isn't... And this touches on one of the things she was saying. Another big change is that the new office, unnamed so far, is not doing the investigations for UAP investigations. Military and or intelligence community components will be doing the investigations and collect information, and this is a quote, to share with the new office. That's a little bit worrisome in some ways, because the new office can't possibly have enough people to investigate every report that comes in, right? So in a way, that's probably okay. But the new office also has to collect the information and do something with it. So we're seeing a little bit of a weakening, in my opinion. And Dean Johnson was writing the same thing. The original Gillibrand amendment was very strong. This one, it's like, okay, well, we want you to go, and you being all these different agencies, collect this information, then you have to turn it over. And we can go into a few other things, like they do have to turn it over. But what's
the power difference, I guess?
Yeah, it is a power difference.
Well, what is the power? I guess, can they go to those departments and say, hey, you guys owe us information, and if you don't give it to us, sort of, here's your budget on the end of a stick with a string, kind of like a carrot?
That's part of it, but there's another section that we got some word about today, that makes it seem like the stick is a little bit stronger than it was before. Let me see if I got that right in front of me.
Yeah.
Because other interesting things like the reverse engineering program. Oh, yeah. Excuse me. The new language says that denials of data will be investigated. And it says twice per year an enumeration of any instances in which data related to UAP was denied to the office because of classification restrictions on that data or for any other reason will be explained. So it's like if the new office goes and asks one of these many military and intelligence groups for information and they say, no, we're not going to give it to you. Well, there is a provision that they're going to have to go and explain twice a year why it wasn't given.
Right.
So they're kind of clamping down on it there. There's the historical data. Sorry, I had so many notes about all this.
That's right. While you're looking up your next note, like if we got Daniel Miller back in the conversation.
Please.
Miller, what were your thoughts on the day's events in court, in regards to this bill? What are the things that stuck out, I guess?
I'm surprised. I think most of what I wanted really stayed in the bill, and I would have loved a civilian scientific advisory board, but I'll take everything else. I think the biggest deal that I got out of this is just that it's official. The Congress wants the DoD to really take this seriously, to look at it. It's going to be an interagency effort with congressional oversight, unclassified reports, but more importantly, numerous classified reports for Congress. So there's going to be actually the people who don't forget that the member of the Senate Armed Services Committee is the one who initiated this current Attorney General. Inspector General, looking into the UAP topic. So Congress clearly doesn't think the DoD's been handling this right. So much to the point that someone in the Armed Services Committee said, hey, you guys need to investigate this. And now this kind of is the other half. It's the legislative half of it saying, you got to, all that data that is pertinent to UAP, all of it, ever, you just send it to this office. How they're going to enforce that, I don't know. But I think it's very much a kind of a wake up people to the DoD in the sense that they now have to be liable to the people who control their purse strings. So who knows what will come from it? Who knows who will be assigned a leadership role there? I think that's going to really be key in seeing how much power this office will have. Hopefully Congress will stay on it. But I think, honestly, out of all the possible scenarios, this is one of the best ones possible. I didn't foresee legislation like this if it was ever going to happen. I thought it'd be at least another year or two till I saw some of the language that I'm seeing in there. I mean, UFO field studies, I'm like, that might be a hard sell to some people. Like, I really do think they're going to get a lot of questions from journalists now, and thank God, because they have some splaining to do. I mean, you can't just put that in a bill and not explain why you want it.
Right. No, that's true. That's a good point.
Yep.
I mean, do you think any of these senators or congressmen are going to get questions like that from our media as far as why they put this kind of verbiage in the bill, Jazz? Do you see that happening? And when do you see this actually being signed into law? Should this go down this week, or what are you hearing?
It's possible it's going to happen fast.
Okay.
Maybe not. There are still debates going on. Going back to what Daniel was just talking about, the original Gillibrand language said that coordinating with other departments, the original one gave directions to other departments. This new language says coordinating with other departments, which I had a little pause with. It's really not as strong as directing, and they're talking specifically about FAA, Homeland Security, Department of Energy. That's a big one, by the way. It says the secretary. Let me get the language right up here. The secretary and the DNI, quote, shall ensure that each element of the intelligence community with data related to unidentified aerial phenomena make such data available immediately to the UAP office. Again, we don't know the name of the office eventually. That's kind of weird. It's very powerful. It's a lot better than what we had before.
Mhm.
And yet, the Department of Energy gets a bit of a love letter here. And I wanted to point this out. The stuff about, and we've discussed this on previous shows, the Department of Energy never reveals anything.
Right.
They don't give anything out. It's one of the most secretive agencies, right? And the DOE and UAP incidents around nuclear facilities, this, by the way, on page 1500, section N of the bill, includes the language that investigations will be done, quote, in consultation with the administrator for nuclear security. Why is that important?
Hmm.
That person is, her name is Jill Hubry. She's the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security, who works where? In the DOE. You know, the administrator for the National Nuclear Security Administration. You can search for comments from this woman all you want. She's a ghost. She doesn't exist. She's one of the people that has never said anything. Nobody from her office has ever said anything about UAP,
Right.
ever. And that got somehow worked into this new version of the bill. So, I mean, there's several. That's one of my concerns. It tells me there were a lot of people that were not just Senate and House in the negotiations for this new language. They got a bunch of stuff put in there that was not in the Gillibrand amendment that Goulet House didn't like. They got their foot in the door. So there's still, in my opinion, it's not just we're in a new era of transparency. You know,
Yeah.
no, the Pentagon, the Department of Energy, a lot of other people, they're still in the conversation, and they're getting their toe under the door, if that's fair.
No, that's fair. I'm curious to know if these departments, these heads, will be able to be called and say a congressional hearing in a year or two once these reports and classified reports start becoming circulated, not only publicly but within the Senate and Congress.
That ties into another section of the bill that actually hasn't been released yet, but we were doing some back and forth today. All the areas, including DOE, there is one expansion coming. So we've been told that they listed a number of departments, but they also listed the phrase and the inspector generals, which didn't show up in the language we saw today, but it includes the inspector generals. So what does that tell us? This is something that's happened. It's gone a long time, but a lot more commonly in recent days. If they're saying, oh, we need information and all this will be referred to the Department of Energy, the Air Force, et cetera, but also the inspector generals. You and I, Luis, we previously talked about, well, if they don't comply, when I say they, the groups that have information, excuse me, well, we might cut your budget next year.
Right.
When you bring in the inspector generals, now suddenly you've brought in a new aspect to it. Because if this gets passed, and it looks like it's going to be law, it's the will of the Congress.
Right.
That you will do these things. And if you refuse to do these things, and when the legislation ties in the inspector generals, as soon as you don't do those things, now they being the Senate and the House, can turn around and go, oh, we'd like an IG investigation. And if the inspector generals go in and say, oh, you were directed by the Congress to provide this information, you didn't provide it. Why? And they'll produce a report and they'll send that back to Congress. And if it says, oh, you defied the will of the Congress, that phrase, will of the Congress, very important. They can then turn around and go, oh, you're in defiance of the will of the Congress. And now because the IG said that, somebody is going to be held accountable, and they can be dragged in for a hearing. And if they won't deliver what congressional law told them to deliver, they can be sent to jail for being in contempt of Congress.
Yeah.
So not only can Congress threaten their budget, they can take the leaders and go, "Oh, you're in contempt." And we have numerous examples of
Do you
people
think
who have
it, do
been
you
in
think it would
contempt.
escalate that far?
You tell me, man.
Hmm.
If they have a thing they're really interested in, and they say, "Give us the information," and they go, "No, we're not going to. We looked at the language in the new amendment." If they go, "No, we're not going to tell you," by dragging the IGs in there, Congress can turn around with one committee hearing and go, "Let's have a vote. Oh, you didn't deliver what you were supposed to deliver. That was the will of the Congress. You're going to jail." And people have been sent to jail for being in contempt of Congress. So, in addition to threatening their budget, I kind of like this part of the new language
Hmm.
because they've really got some extrajudicial, language. They can okay, fine, we'll lock you up. People have gone to jail for more than a year for this,
Right.
and you don't even have to go to court for it. So,
Hmm.
that was good, I thought.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you think with an IG walking into an office that any office, doesn't matter which one, would be kind of nervous and probably cooperate, or do you foresee them not cooperating and holding it tight? I mean, I could see how they could put together a report that barely fills the needs of what's being asked, and they're just like, okay, here you go, just leave us alone, give us our budget, and we'll be on our merry way.
Oh man, it's such a case by case thing, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can defy the IG. I mean, that's the last word.
Yeah.
Currently, Lou Elizondo has a huge IG thing going on that could get a lot of people into trouble. So, I don't really think we know that.
Yeah.
There's just so many weird parts to this bill, but I do think this is evidence that there were people from the DoD, from the intelligence community, that were involved in the negotiations because they got some concessions.
Yeah.
But a lot of it still went the way of, I think, Gillibrand and Rubio. Look at the UFO reverse engineering program. I know it doesn't actually say that word for word, but
Right.
I assume you already saw that.
Yeah.
They're putting down directives like, "Oh, we have to collect all this information and let's see what's going on." They're covering all the stuff that Gillibrand was talking about, like physiological effects on people from UAP, saying, "Oh, we need to find unusual technology and see if we can reverse engineer it." Luis, really, I think it's a big win for people wanting transparency. There were some areas where we backed off a bit,
Yeah.
but most of it, I think it was a really good outcome.
Yeah. Well, no, it seems that way. The invasion with a $5 donation. Just show Luis some love. He's done so much for the community. Thank you for both donations. Truly appreciate it. This is not me, man. This is you guys. This belongs to all of us. This bill and this amendment. And speaking of, do you see any more changes coming to this?
Probably.
Hmm.
Probably minor. I mean, let's look at how this got in. The NDAA died, right? That was basically just dead. And they went and took the whole thing and snuck it into a package on a unnoticed bill so they get it into reconciliation with the House.
Mm-hmm.
So They already had long hearings. I think both the House and the Senate definitely had input to get all that to what we have now. I don't think anybody else was in there going, "Oh, we don't want the UFO stuff." It's like they got it talked through. At this point, it's probably going to go through. There are some weird bits that are left. Let me give you one. If you go, I know we linked the thing earlier. Sorry. On page 1498, historical data reports. Each report under paragraph 8 shall include, with respect to the year covered by the report, the following information. Section A, all reported unidentified aerial phenomena, related events that occurred during the 1-year period. Section B, all reported UAP phenomena, related events that occurred during a period other than that 1-year period, but were not included in an earlier report. I think these are strong bits of language saying we're demanding answers. You're going to give us the answers. And if we don't get the answers the first time, we're going to come back and we're going to ask you again. That's what it sounds like to me. And I was talking to Dean Johnson about that, and it's not everything that was in the original Gillibrand language, but a lot of it's very strong.
It's pretty good.
So I think it's still there. And
yeah,
if you had asked me for a total summary, I would just say I'm not unhappy. I think we got something really good.
Well, no, and I mean, considering where we were a week ago with sort of how we were feeling about it, I think that's a good turnaround. So I guess because we've gone a few minutes over here, and thanks for sticking around, Jazz, but any final thoughts on the bill or any predictions?
My predictions at this point are kind of the same as every time we've talked about it. I'm very happy with this outcome. Could it have been better in some areas? Probably. Way better than what the DOD came up with, I think it's going to go through. And I agree with Dean. I think it's pretty much a done deal. This is a must-pass bill. And there was a private secret set of discussions that dealt specifically with this. It wasn't the whole Congress, but they went and they dealt with it. And there was a bipartisan thing like, yeah, we got to do this, So my confidence has increased. I think it's going to go through.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Mr. Jazz Shaw, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for being Jazz Shaw as you normally are. And we'll see you soon, sir.
All right.
Talk to you soon. Joe? Yes, sir. All right, you guys. That was the infamous Jazz Shaw. As you see, it seems like this Gillibrand amendment's it's been changed. Might get changed maybe a few more times. Hopefully, additions instead of subtractions. We shall see. But I think it's looking good. It's looking pretty good for us as far as an actual bill signed by the president that encourages the government to look at and take this topic seriously in many different ways, and not only report it twice internally with classified briefings to members of Congress, but the public also gets a yearly briefing. So I think that is also important. It's fair. It's got to play into this discussion on some level. Things got a little weird and a little contentious a little halfway through the show. I want to send my apologies to Chris. I'll reach out to him privately. I don't like anybody to be feel uncomfortable So hopefully I'll be able to talk to him and we can straighten that out and figure out a way for him to come back. And sometimes people don't agree, and this is where the topic gets emotional. You've got someone who's had an experience and looks at it through that lens. Not only that, but is interviewed and spoken to not only lawmakers but fellow veterans, and has the sense that, hey, there's something to this, and is screaming for people to pay attention at it. And then you've got a very scientific approach, but I think a very open scientific approach. I think Chris Cogswell is one of the most open-minded scientists out there that is actually looking at this, but trying to bring solutions that don't involve the government. He's, as far as he's concerned, it's oil and water. You don't need one without the other. And I agree. I think both can exist separately. But to me, I think the conversation eventually is going to have to be melded. Both of these sides are going to have to come to the table and have the conversation. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Thank you guys so much for sticking around for the extra hour. Truly appreciate it. If you haven't done so already, this awkward podcast will be available on Spotify and iTunes right after the show. So check out the Spotify and iTunes. Leave us a rate and review. It'd be super helpful. Want to thank all of you in the chat. I know I saw Ryan Sprague in here, Jason Brown, Case for Infinity, and Laura Campbell, and Simon Fly. I saw all you guys' comments. Thank you guys so much for the super chats. Thank you guys for being here. We had UFO Jesus in the house. Ryan Robbins, thank you, man, for checking out the show and your input that you were putting in there. I was trying to read one of your comments, and then we got into the weird part of the show. But yeah, hey, we sometimes live for the awkward on this show. We revel in it. I just wish I had Michael and Rather here. I think we might have been able to smooth that out a little better. I was on my own, but yeah, man, I got nothing but love for both those guys, and I will definitely check the mail, Ryan, for sure. Thank you. I'll do it right. Send the check in the mail. He said. He didn't say. I'm sorry. I'm misreading things here. He said, I'll send you the check, my friend. It's on the way. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. That way you are notified anytime we do stuff like this, or we do shows out of our normal time frames. You'll be notified anytime we do. Don't forget to check out all of our links below, every single guest and every single host. Support Daniel Miller. He's got a Patreon. He's trying to do this, on the same level that we're doing here. That's why we gave him the show. So support him as much as you can. He's doing some really great work. I thought he had an awesome conversation with Chris Cogswell, and hopefully we'll be able to continue. I have a feeling we will. So with all of that said, you guys, thank you so damn much for coming aboard, getting weird with us here on another special edition of Unknown or Known Quantities in the Unidentified Celebrity Review Mashup Special Edition show. My name's Luis Jimenez. Thank you for getting weird with us here on another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review, your home for credible news, reviews, commentary on everything UAP, UFO, science, emerging tech, and futurism. My name's Luis Jimenez. Until next time, you guys, stay safe out there. Be nice to each other. Peace.
I'm going to tell y'all right now, all of these wonderful people would not be here without Patreon supporters like you. If you enjoy credible news, reviews, and commentary on UFOs and UAPs 5 days a week, you want to support this show. What's your name? Marty. Marty, look how easy this is, Marty. Pick up your phone. Boom! You're a Patreon member. I mean, look, it's so easy. You just click the link, which is right here. Just for $1 a month, you can support this show. Just fill out the information and pledge what's comfortable for you. It could be $1, $5, $10, or who knows. Just support.